Everyone, and welcome to the Metabolic Dysregulation and Cancer Risk Program. This is our pre-application webinar, and we are thrilled to have you attend today. I'd like to kick us off with some logistics. Please note that all lines will be muted and in listen-only mode throughout this presentation. You're welcome to submit comments at any time during Q&A, and you can then select the All Panelists feature. You may need to activate the appropriate panel on your menus. That's on the right-hand side that says Q&A. Closed captioning will be available in just one moment at the bottom of in the bottom section near Q&A. And please note that this webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on the website. And that link will be available of where you can find this recording at the end of the event. Without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to my esteemed colleague.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to turn off my video just a bit, just so that to ensure sort of the smooth delivery of this presentation. Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Tram Lam, and on behalf of my NCI colleagues, thank you for your interest in the 2 RFAs associated with the Metabolic Dysregulation and Cancer Risk Program. This is a trans-NCI initiative with participation from several NCI divisions and centers. I am joined today by Dr. Dashner, Salter, and Van Duyn, who are the scientific program contacts representing the divisions and center. We have structured the pre-application webinar to ensure at least 30 to 45 minutes for questions and answers. So let us begin. This pre-application webinar will cover information relevant to RFA-CA-21-021 and RFA-CA-21-022. Through these 2 RFAs, the intent is to support transdisciplinary research that will enhance our knowledge of the dynamics and underlying mechanisms that link obesity, metabolic dysregulation, and cancer risk. Awarded recipients of both RFAs, the Individual Research Project Grants, or the U01s, and the Coordinating Center, or the U24, together will constitute the Metabolic Dysregulation and Cancer Risk Program. The Metabolic Dysregulation and Cancer Risk Program will function as a consortium to advance the overarching goal of the program, which is to identify tangible mechanistic and etiologic pathways that link metabolic dysregulation with obesity-associated cancer risk to inform cancer prevention and strategies. In particular, it seeks to foster a transdisciplinary approach that would not have occurred with a traditional single-discipline investigation. In the following slide, we will go through the details relevant to the application for each individual RFA. Although the 2 RFA are distinct funding opportunity announcements, they are also companion to one another. And as such, we strongly recommend that applicants familiarize themselves to the details in each RFA, and the link is provided right here. For this program, we define metabolic dysregulation as alterations in glucose utilization and storage, insulin sensitivity, and/or lipid metabolism. I'm going to now focus on the U01 RFA, RFA-CA-21-021 Clinical Trial Optional. This RFA specifically solicits applications for research project grants focusing on human studies. We define that as research involving individuals or groups of individuals or data from humans. A responsive application could be an observational or an interventional study. A research proposal with clinically relevant experimental models must be integrated with human samples. Applicants may propose to test a hypothesis using complementary transdisciplinary approaches that incorporate experimental models with human studies. All research project grants should address one or more of the following main research objectives. 1, investigate molecular mechanisms that define how metabolic dysregulation impacts obesity-associated cancer risk. 2, characterize an autometabolic profile that identifies at-risk individuals. Or 3, test intervention designed to modify obesity-associated metabolic pathways to increase cancer risk. This RFA will prioritize research focused on the role of insulin resistance and how it affects cancer risk, and investigations on crosstalk between obesity-associated metabolic abnormalities with key biologic processes, such as low-grade inflammation, and how they mediate cancer risk. The inclusion of participants with different racial and ethnic backgrounds will receive focused attention. What do programs look for when we assess whether a proposed applicant is responsive to this RFA? Features of a responsive applicant include one that is focused on metabolic dysregulation and relevant to obesity. The endpoint of interest should be cancer risk or marker of cancer risk. A proposal, for example, on recurrence among cancer survivors would not be responsive to this RFA. It must have a substantial human component. For example, a proposal using multiple mouse models without a human component would not be responsive. We also recommend applicants to consider scientific relevant measures of adiposity. For example, going beyond just using BMI as a marker of obesity. As cross-consortium activities will be a required participation in this program, applicants should be willing to engage in post-award collaborative research. We will also require a data sharing plan that is compliant to all NIH data sharing policies. These, the next two boxes here are potential study designs that are transdisciplinary and have a focus in human for your consideration. Possible endpoints that are responsive to this RFA include cancer risk, cancer precursors to risk, markers of cancer risk, and metabolic related markers for the interventional studies. I want now to draw your attention to two important elements of the application for the U01 RFA. This is related to the budget and the required set-aside fund that we call collaborative fund. For this RFA, we hope to fund approximately 4 to 5 applications, depending on the availability of fund. The science should always drive the budget and must reflect the actual needs of the proposed science. Nevertheless, there is a cap to this RFA of $850,000 in direct costs per year. This excludes subaward or FNA costs. With this budget cap, applications to the U01 RFA are asked to budget for travel to annual meeting for the consortium. You are also required to budget a set amount for collaborative fund to be used in post-award. Each award will have a collaborative fund budgeted to enable cross-consortium activities and/or for pilot projects that will be developed at post-award. The amount of set aside for the U01 is $25,000 or 10%, whichever is greater. It is important to know that the collaborative fund is restrictive and cannot be rebudgeted for other activities. In the first year, we recognize that developmental projects realistically may not occur as the consortium is just being formed. Program may approve this amount to be carried over to the next year. Nevertheless, it should be underscored that a requirement for this award is participation in cross-consortium collaboration, and as such, the set aside needs to be used to facilitate synergy across the consortium. In the next two slides, I will focus on the U24 RFA, RFA-CA-21-022, clinical trial not allowed. This RFA solicits applications to fund a coordinating center to facilitate coordination and collaborative research among multiple individual research project grants as part of the Consortium for the Metabolic Dysregulation and Cancer Risk Program. The coordinating center will have a central role in integrating the efforts of individual research project grants. A successful coordinating center should effectively facilitate communication, synergy, and integrate efforts across the individual research projects to optimize cross-fertilization and transdisciplinary research to achieve the goals of the consortium. The purpose of the coordinating centers includes provide administrative support for the program, facilitate communication across members of the consortium, including providing meeting support, coordinating reviews of the cross-consortium pilot project applications, create and maintain a website, and facilitate deposition of data into repositories. They can also coordinate the development of standard operating procedures and best practices to identify common measures and targets, collect core common data elements, and biological samples as identified by the steering committee. They also will be asked to participate in cross-consortium activities, not only just to coordinate it. All applicants to the U24 RFA must address the following main features and component highlight on the right. This includes leadership and administrative, data informatics, outreach, collaboration, integration, and evaluation. The specific details of each of these components are carefully outlined in the published RFA. And again, we highly encourage for applicants to review the published RFAs. I want to take a moment to go through the budget. We only intend to fund one coordinating center for this funding announcement. The budget for the coordinating center should not exceed $550,000 in direct costs per year. Like the U01s, the coordinating center must also set aside restricted collaborative fund. This is in an amount of $25,000. This amount may be used to supplement cross-consortium activities, enhance or extend a feature of a proposed pilot project among collaborators within the consortium, or to fund travel award for junior investigators, for example. Again, this cannot be rebudgeted and cannot be carried over after the first year of the grant period. I want to take a moment to go through the organizational structure of the consortium and its governance, as well as the post-award cross-consortium collaboration that is important to this initiative. Both RFAs will use a cooperative agreement mechanism. It's the U's in the U01 and the U24. What this means is that NCI program staff will have substantial programmatic involvement that is above and beyond the normal stewardship role in the awards. Award recipients must agree to the cooperative agreement terms and conditions of the award. One or more NCI program staff will be assigned at the NCI project scientists, and they will have a substantial scientific and programmatic involvement. Again, that is above and beyond the normal stewardship role in the awards. Additionally, an NCI program director will be responsible for the normal scientific and programmatic stewardship that's part of each award. The Metabolic Dysregulation and Cancer Risk Program will be governed by the steering committee, which is comprised of the PIs of the coordinating center, as well as the individual research project grants, as well as the designated NCI program staff. These will be voting members. There are also non-voting members, which may include additional members of the research team of the award recipients, as well as other NCI program staff. I'm sorry, I'm having a problem advancing the screen. I have mentioned several times already the cross-consortium collaboration repeatedly, and I wanted to provide some additional details. The purpose of the required cross-consortium collaboration is to facilitate synergy within the consortium to achieve unmet scientific priorities of the metabolic dysregulation and cancer risk program. The cross-consortium activities will be developed and conducted by the award recipients at post-award. These activities will be coordinated by the coordinating centers with the approval from the steering committee. Funding for the cross-consortium activities will be supported in part by set-aside collaborative funds. Again, all cross-consortium activities shall be vetted and approved per the recommendation of the science steering committee. Collaborative funds may be combined between two or more recipients, can be used to support the expansion or inclusion of an exploratory aim to incorporate, identify common measures or targets, develop or incorporate new methodologies that can be validated via multiple U01s. It can be used to facilitate the inclusion or expansion of a diverse study population. It may also be used to support investigation of multi-year projects, developmental projects that could be jointly explored between multiple U01s. As mentioned earlier, all these activities will occur after post-awards and will be reviewed and vetted by the steering committee. Before we go into the Q&As, I just want to leave some last tips from program. Again, it is really important for you to review and be familiar with the published RFAs. It has all the details that you will need to guide you through the application process. Pay attention to the research plan, the review criteria, as well as the terms and conditions of the cooperative agreement. Please contact the scientific contacts for clarification or any questions that you may have after this webinar, for example. It's often really helpful if you can send us a draft one-pager of your scientific aims. It will help us guide you appropriately. Although the letter of intent is optional, it is appreciated to allow our program to assess the scope of the applications coming in. Lastly, these are the important dates that you should keep in mind. If you have any questions about these dates, again, feel free to contact us. We are now going to enter the Q&A sessions. We will start with questions that were submitted to us prior. You are able to submit questions as well using the chat box, as Christine had outlined earlier. Christine, along with my NCI colleagues, will help me compile them, and then we will go through them accordingly. If we don't get to your questions today, we will post a document with all the questions and answer on our website for you to review. So one of the questions that was submitted is, will there be subsequent offerings of this RFA? More than one offering? There will be only one issuance of this RFA. Question 2 is whether non-US entities are able to apply as PIs or US-based institution is required for any application from non-US research entity. Are we allowed to include multi-PI from a foreign institution? Foreign component is allowed for the U01 RFA as long as the grant application is not foreign. In other words, it will have to have a US-based institution as primary. Foreign component is not allowed for the U24 RFA. Are grant applications for the RFAs allowed for all investigators or only those investigators affiliated with an established metabolic dysregulation and cancer risk program members? It is open to all potential investigators. The Metabolic Dysregulation and Cancer Risk Program is a consortium and will be established from the award recipients of the 2 RFAs. With retrospective studies based on electronic medical record examining history of obesity and metabolic dysregulation in relation to incidence of tumor subtype from FFP samples be eligible competitive? Yes, if the scientific hypothesis is focused on cancer risk. Let us know whether projects must only relate to cancer risk, so developing the disease, or whether prognosis is also okay. The proposed project must be focused on cancer risk or markers of cancer risk. Are studies of recurrence metastasis responsive to the RFA? No, it's not. Are studies of risk of secondary cancer responsive to the RFA? Yes, it is. Are preclinical studies paired with human tissue analyses appropriate for this mechanism or clinical trial preferred? Yes, preclinical studies coupled with human tissues are acceptable proposed study designs. Please keep in mind the primary focus of the RFA is on human studies. Clinical trial is optional. Is it enough to take tissues and create immortalized cell lines for studies, or does this mean experiments with human outputs? The proposed study must include human samples or human subjects to be responsive to this RFA. Can an R01 previously submitted to another FOA be submitted to this RFA as a resubmission? We will recommend a new application that takes into account the structure of the consortium, the features outlined by the U01 RFA. Would focusing on population groups that are metabolic obese be well advised or received? yes, this population would be responsive to the RFA. Can an existing consortium of cohorts apply as a single application? Yes. I'm now going to open up to the questions that were submitted. And I'd like my colleagues to join me in this process. So the first question I received is, should we define any potential topics or collaborative pilot studies, or should this just be budgeted without any mentioned? I would have, the cooperative, the consortium structure allowed emerging pilot studies to come out of the award recipients. So I would not spend too much time sort of describing a potential topic for pilot studies, because we don't know what other studies will be joining the consortium. Am I correct that $85,000 per year is required if the direct costs are the maximum of for the RFA? Yes, 10% of the budget. Should each individual research proposal itself be transdisciplinary, or will be a collective 4 or 5 projects together be compiled to achieve the transdisciplinary intent of the overall U? This is a really good question. I think we want to promote a transdisciplinary approach within the individual project research grant. But what we hope is, as a whole, as a consortium, collectively, it will be transdisciplinary in nature. In the application, do we need to describe proposed possible? I believe I answered this already. Is an ARA required for budget over 500,000? How many weeks prior? I'm sorry to not mention this. ARAs are not required for the 2 RFAs. So again, they are not required. To confirm, existence of the coordinating center is not intended to replace topic expert biostatistical analyses by the PIs of the individual study, at least for the primary analyses. Data will be shared with the entire consortium and the coordinating center, and can include additional analyses. And the suggested endpoints of interest are primarily related to cancer risk in humans. From this, should it be interpreted that including a parallel animal preclinical trial aimed to extend beyond risk-related endpoints in the proposed clinical trial by examining incidence and progression-related endpoints, would this be discouraged? I would not say it would be discouraged, but I would want to invite my other colleagues from the Division of Cancer Prevention if they would like to chime in as well. Ed, would you like to chime in?
Let me just look at that more closely, Tran. I need to know more details about, what that animal preclinical study is and how they're going to extend that, especially since they're talking about progression. So I don't think that the progression component about incidence depends on what exactly they're looking at. Is it the development of cancer or the risk of cancer? So I think the specific aims
So I would encourage whomever asked this questions to please contact program staff just to elaborate on what you mean or what you're thinking of, and we can provide additional guidance for this. It seems that there is a strong emphasis on insulin sensitivity. This may not be the most novel. Can we emphasize other pathways as well? Yes, definitely, as related to metabolic dysregulation. It is insulin resistance is an interest and a focus of this RFA, but we welcome other pathways that are relevant to understand the mechanism underlying the link between metabolic dysregulation and cancer risk. It is mentioned that substantial human component is required. Could you provide some more details or description on how much human component would be considered substantial or appropriate for this RFA? I would say that if you have 3 aims and all 3 aims are proposing using a preclinical trials, but then you add a line in it that said, and we will look at human samples or include human samples, that would be not be appropriate. We would want to ensure that this has relevance to human studies. So to me, you know, if it's just an add-in just to show that it's inclusive of human studies by adding just an analysis, then I would not recommend that. Is there a preference for including multiple cancer sites, total cancer incidence, or focus on a single site? I would say this is really dependent on the scientific proposal. I don't think that program at this stage have a specific preference. We want the science that you're proposing to guide the endpoints that would be appropriate. Is there a preference? Oh, I think this was answered already. As I understand it, the preclinical studies must be integrated with human specimens. Would it be appropriate to have aim 1, a clinical trial, aim 2, a mouse trial experiment, aim 3, integration of human specimens from clinical trial into mouse models of cancer risk? I think that would be appropriate. Phil, Ed, Marianne?
Yeah, I don't know what Phil's thinking is. My 2 cents would be, if the primary endpoint that the grant is looking at is to get endpoint of murine cancer with some human biomarkers to lead to their definitive mouse study, that's not responsive, in my opinion. Because it looks like they're teeing up human data early and then definitive stuff in mouse. If you want to do human or human and other animal models, should be animal first going to human.
Phil, do you have any additional thoughts?
Yeah, Tram, I will repeat what Ed said, because Ed, your volume is very low and you're hard to hear. And if there's anything you can do to increase that would be great. But one of the important points that Ed just made is I think we're looking at what the experimental endpoints will be. So in both models and in the collected human specimens, we're interested in how these metabolic markers might be affecting risk and incidence, not metabolic changes in established tumors. So I hope that is helpful guidance.
And I think the only thing that I would add is that would be a fairly ambitious project. And so just to be sure that you have the adequate resources and the time frame to do what it is you're proposing. And then Tram, there's one other, there was an earlier question which we might want to just circle quickly back to, which was about the existence of the coordinating center with regards to whether or not it was meant to replace topic expert biostatistical analyses by the PIs. And I believe that that's not the intent, right? The intent is for each project to be able, or each grantee to be able to conduct their own analysis, statistical analyses, and the coordinating center would have to be able to enhance and definitely be able to be involved with the collaborative projects.
Yes, and I thought I mentioned that, but thank you for underscoring that.
Graham, can I add one final point about that? Can you hear me?
Yes,
And you're really light. Your
sorry.
volume is very, very low.
Yeah, I apologize. I don't know how to fix it. I'll try to speak louder. How about that?
That's better.
Good. There's been a lot of questions about, the focus on preclinical versus clinical or both. And I'd like Tram or Phil or Marianne chime in, but to me, I think our thinking, at least in part, was that there's a lot more data, mechanistic data in preclinical models and far less in human models. And so really we want to learn more about the metabolic dysregulation in humans. And if animal models helps to answer your driving hypothesis, that's great. But we want it to ultimately benefit our knowledge base about metabolic dysregulation.
Tram, this is Phil. I just want to add back to one of the previous questions about how projects that look at multiple sites would be viewed. And I think it's fine. You don't need to focus on only one site. But then I think, there are 13 obesity-associated cancers with increased risk under obese conditions. And so obviously we're focused on those. However, if you have a project that that looks at more than one site and say a single pathway in 2 different sites, I think that would be of interest. I think you have to be a little careful in doing that the pathways that and the adipocytes that are associated with pancreas versus colon might in fact be different, but I think we're open to having projects that look at more than one tissue at a time on comparative analysis. And then there's I'm sorry, there's a question that popped up in the Q&A box about the appropriateness of MPI applications. And I think MPI applications for this would be fine, but I want to emphasize they're not required. So we do want transdisciplinary projects and MPIs are welcome, but that's certainly not the only way to do that.
We have a question with respect to someone who this is her first or his first U01. The question is, so this is like submitting a regular R01 and NCI forms the consortium. So you are using an U01 because it's a cooperative agreement. But yes, it's similarly to submitting your own individual project with the idea that you will be part of a consortium, should you be successful, that will be formed from the awardees of the 2 RFAs. I hope that is clear. We have a question about, can applicants be listed on more than one application? I'm not quite sure I understand this question. Are you intending to apply multiple times, or are you thinking of applying as a primary PI on one application and a co-investigator on another application? So I would just need a little bit more detail to answer this question. Are studies looking at how obesity affects change in risk biomarkers to chemoprevention agent responsive? Ed, would you like to answer this question? Ed, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Tram. I'm trying to. Would you repeat that? I've lost where you are in the question.
Yes, the question is, are studies looking at how obesity affects change in risk biomarkers to chemoprevention agents responsive?
I mean, so long as they address metabolic risk, as well metabolic dysregulation and cancer risk, I think that at least potentially they would be. I'd like to see the specific question and aim for it, but potentially yes.
Yeah, Tran, this is Phil. I would just add to that. So, I mean, with the chemopreventive agent being tested here, is that uniquely affecting markers associated with obesity, or is it a general cancer marker? So I think we would want it focused on an obesity-linked marker. But other than that, I think it's possible that that could be responsive, yes. Tram, I have one here in the Q&A box I'd like to read out just for everybody to comment on. So the question is, how much emphasis will be put on preliminary data in review? And I'll just start out by saying there's review criteria listed in the announcement. These are very similar to, standard R01 review criteria. For this particular RFA, I think if you have something that's a really strong premise and it's well supported by rigorous prior published data, then, the reliance on your own preliminary data may be a little bit less. But obviously, the more high quality preliminary data that your own group has is usually the best indication to reviewers that there's a track record there and that this is a feasible project.
I don't have anything else to add to that. Thanks, Phil. One question asked, where can we find proposal specifics such as pace limit and individual components required? It is really all in the published guides, so I would recommend you reviewing that. On the top of my head, I don't know the exact page, but I can find that out for you if you like, although I think it's quite evident in the published guide. There is a question on the due dates for the letter of intent. I believe the due date is on September 1st, but you have up to feel free to send it to us a month prior to the receipt date. There is a question whether or not if we budget for cross-center collaboration, can those funds be carried over or rebudgeted? No, it cannot. The collaborative fund cannot be rebudgeted for other activities that are not related to a consortium activities or a pilot project that's identified within the consortium. It may be carried over in the first year of the consortium or the grant period, but not after that. Any unused fund may be offset per the recommendation of program. There's a question on, instead of human biospecimen being used in preclinical studies, there can also be a combination of data from both human and preclinical studies, correct? I believe so. I think that would be appropriate. I'm just reading through all the questions.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I have one from the Q&A box, and actually it's a repeat, so it bears mentioning, I guess. Does the U01, what are the page limits here? Is it a 6-page or a 12-page limit?
I believe it's 12-page, but I will double check on that. Will early stage investigators be considered as the PI? I don't see why not.
Yeah, I tried to answer that as well. And yes, ESIs can be the PI of one of these U01s. That would count toward your first substantial NIH funding. But I wanted to point out, and I put this in the wrong chat box, I apologize. These are not percentiled applications in review, and so there's no scoring advantage for ESI applications. But you're certainly welcome to apply.
That is an important point that Phil just made.
Tram, it looks like the individual who asked a question about being on the application more than once came back in. I don't know if you saw that or not.
Oh, I see it now. I asked if you could be on more than one application. Clarification is that I've been asked to collaborate on 2 different submissions as co-investors on each, I think. Is that okay? I believe so.
Yeah, that is fine. You know, with the standard NCI program caveat that would be competing against yourself, but you can do that.
Would epidemiologic mechanistic aim plus an aim based on existing blood samples from a competing trial be transdisciplinary enough? Or would a de novo RCT be preferred? I think I would need to know what the scientific questions are. So it's hard for me to say preference, but I believe an epi aim plus one using blood sample from a trial, that would be considered cross-disciplinary. Is the emphasis on biomarker identification or mechanism establishment of link between obesity and cancer? I believe what we hope is to identify etiologic and mechanistic pathways that underlying the link between obesity and cancer risk within the context of metabolic dysregulation. So biomarker identification may be part of an objective, but the overarching goal we hope is to identifying underlying mechanism that link obesity, metabolic dysregulation, and cancer risk.
And I just want to emphasize, Tram, thank you for that. It's a great question and an important one, and I'll emphasize Tram's answer to that, which is we're really looking for establishment of a mechanism of a link between obesity and that particular cancer. The mechanism being the underlying metabolic dysregulation that's occurring in that cancer, and biomarkers are as Tram said, can be part of the project, but that's not the emphasis of the project.
There is a question asking for more details on the informatics core for the coordinating center. What we envision is the coordinating center may be able to provide some biostatistic support for pilot projects that develop within the consortium, some of the preliminary analyses that may happen. And as Marianne mentioned, this does not mean that it excludes the expertise or biostatistical expertise required that's part of the individual research project. There's a question whether or not OCAM is participating in this. This is a trans-NCI initiative with participation from the Division of Cancer Control and Population Sciences, the Division of Cancer Biology, the Division of Cancer Prevention, and Center for oh, Marianne, sorry, I'm blanking out on your Center for to reduce
cancer health disparities.
That's right. I apologize for that.
No problem. But your point is well taken. It's a transdisciplinary project or program, and I don't think it would exclude complementary approaches to cancer either. But it would need to, of course, be, as has been repeated and mentioned repeatedly, that we're really looking at the mechanistic links between obesity, metabolic dysregulation, and cancer risk.
So we're approaching the end of the hour, and I just want to spend some time to let you know that, as you know, this webinar is being recorded, and we will archive the recording of this pre-application webinar on this website, highlight here. We also will be hoping to compile a document with all the questions and answers that have occurred today, or any additional ones that we received by potential applicants, just so that everyone will have access to the questions as well as the answers. And lastly, I hope that you find this pre-application webinar helpful to guide you through the process. And as always, Phil, myself, Ed, and Marianne are available to answer any additional questions, or if you need clarification, please feel free to reach out to us. We function as a team, and so one questions to one will be shared among all of us. But if there is a specific inquiry about cancer biology, for example, Phil is the contact expert in this. If there are questions related to the clinical trials or cancer prevention, please reach out to Ed. Likewise, if there's questions about cancer disparities, Marianne is our point of contact. And if there's just any general questions about the RFAs or related to epidemiology, I'm available. And we want to wish you all good luck, and we hope to see a lot of applications that go into this important initiative. Phil and Ed and Marianne, any last comments?
No, I think you summed it up nicely.
All
We
right.
hope everyone found this useful, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Yes.
Just want to reiterate what Tram said, which is if you have a question or you're not sure, contact one of us. Don't wait, submit your grant, and then wish you'd ask the question.
Yes. Use us, in other words.
Right.
I wish you a wonderful rest of the summer, and again, good luck. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.